Have you ever heard of a miracle that defied logic, medicine, and the rumors of an entire town? In a forgotten corner of rural Georgia, where the soil seemed as barren as the heart of one man, a story took root, one that no one has ever truly been able to explain. A widowed farmer sentenced to loneliness, a cook with unshakable faith, and 3 lives that appeared when everyone said it was impossible. This is the legend that lives on in Hazel Ridge, where love, suspicion, and mystery wove themselves into a tale that still leaves folks scratching their heads. What would you do if fate handed you the very thing everyone swore you could never have? The rooster crowed somewhere in the distance, its voice cutting through the thick fog that blanketed Hazel Ridge. The McCall farm, with its acres of dry earth and aging wooden fences, slept beneath the weight of decades of silent stories. Levi McCall, the man who owned the land, stood on the front porch of the old farmhouse, cradling a mug of black coffee between his calloused fingers. His eyes, worn from time and resignation, held the sorrow of a man who had everything, except the one thing he longed for most. "Levi, you gonna leave this land without a legacy?" His mother, Miss Edna, called as she burst through the screen door, apron dusted with flour. Her voice cut clean, sharp as a knife honed on years of hard living. Levi replied slowly, voice low, nearly a whisper. "Mama, there's things you don't get to choose, and children don't grow from dry ground." Miss Edna huffed, folding her arms as if carrying the grief of generations in her chest. Infertility wasn't just a private wound in Hazel Ridge, it was a public burden. In a town that small, whispers grew faster than weeds after the rain. Levi knew every trip to the feed store, every Sunday pew at church, came with sideways glances and hushed gossip behind hymnals. That morning, after the usual exchange with his mother, Levi headed down to the main barn. The dirt road stretched between brittle pastures, dotted with tired-looking cattle. Walt, his oldest ranch hand, stood by the fence line sharpening a blade, slow and steady. "Mornin', Walt," Levi said. Walt looked up with a half-smile tugging at the edge of his lips. "Mornin', boss. You're up early." Then, almost casually, he added, "Ever hear the saying, 'Not every dry patch stays barren'?" Levi stopped in his tracks. "What's that supposed to mean?" Walt shrugged. "Life's got surprises, Levi. Sometimes the good Lord holds onto a seed until just the right time." The words clung to Levi's thoughts like red clay to boots. Foolish, maybe, but they stirred something long buried in him, a flicker of hope he thought had dried up years ago. Later that day, back at the house, Levi sat in the main room surrounded by old family photos. Strong men, proud women, all framed with children clinging to their knees. A lineage of promise, until him. That night, with wind whistling through the cracks in the windowpane, Levi dreamed. He was walking across a vast, dry field. From the parched earth sprang wildflowers, blooming in vivid color. In the center of the meadow stood a woman with dark hair and a radiant smile, holding 3 laughing children in her arms. He awoke breathless, sweat trickling down his temple. Staring at the ceiling, he whispered, "Maybe it's not too late." He didn't know it yet, but something was already on its way to change everything. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee in the quiet kitchen, Levi heard his mother fussing outside. Curious, he peeked through the window and saw Miss Edna tacking a handwritten notice to the post outside the general store across the street. "Help wanted, cook, McCall Farm." Levi furrowed his brow. In Hazel Ridge, folks didn't post job notices. You found help through word of mouth, not on a post. His mother's bold move wasn't just a request, it was a quiet cry for something or someone to fill the emptiness. That afternoon, as the sun slipped lazily behind the hills, the first applicant arrived, a stout woman with a scarf tied around her head and a look that said she'd seen more than her share of hardship. They spoke briefly. Levi felt nothing. Over the next few days, others came. None felt right. Then, one rainy morning she arrived, and with her, everything began to shift. The rain had just let up, but the scent of damp earth lingered in the air. Levi stood in the doorway of the farmhouse watching the gravel path. Down the road walked a young woman with determined steps, holding a worn canvas bag and a crooked umbrella. She wore a simple floral dress and a shy smile that somehow brightened the grey sky. "Mornin', sir," she called gently. "Mornin'," Levi replied, caught off guard by her energy and youth. Miss Edna stepped forward, eyeing her up and down like a county fair judge. "You know how to cook for a working man, girl?" The woman smiled, unshaken. "If the man's worth cooking for, ma'am, I surely do." Levi couldn't help but chuckle. There was something different about her, something that cut straight through the dust and stillness that hung over the farm. She was hired on the spot, no formalities, and from that moment on, Levi's life began to drift quietly off the course he'd resigned himself to. In the early days, the change was subtle. The kitchen began to smell like cornbread and fried apples instead of musty air and bitter coffee. Levi, used to eating in silence, started lingering after meals. At first, their conversations were small: weather, cattle feed, broken fences. But day by day, they grew roots. One evening, as she washed dishes and Levi read the day-old paper, she spoke softly, without looking up. "This house, it's big, but it feels lonely." He lowered the paper, met her gaze. "This land used to echo with the sound of children. Lately, it just echoes." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared. But Hazel Ridge had never been good at keeping quiet. Word spread fast. At the diner, at church, in barbershop chairs, whispers started swirling. "They say the new cook's real pretty. Looks like Levi's cooking up more than just dinner. Reckon she'll do what no one else could?" The comments found their way to Levi through backhanded remarks and sideways smiles. Instead of anger, he let them settle like dust on old boots. One night at the local tavern, Levi's childhood friend Cole leaned in, whiskey-heavy breath trailing behind him. "Word of advice, Levi. Get yourself a real woman. One that can give you a name to carry on. Them pretty little cooks from nowhere, they're just passing through." Levi clenched his jaw, said nothing. He paid his tab and left, heart tight with shame and rage. Back at the farm, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had any right to want more, if he dared dream of a life different from the one everyone had already written for him. But her laughter kept drifting back to him, soft, unexpected, like wind chimes in a storm. And deep down, Levi McCall began to believe the harvest he'd given up on might still come after all. The morning haze clung low to the hills of Hazel Ridge as Levi sipped his coffee at the kitchen table. The sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting a pale light over the quiet farm. Just then, he heard the screen door creak open and the sound of boots on wood. "Got fresh collards and lettuces from the bottom plot," the new cook, her name was Ellie, announced cheerfully as she stepped into the kitchen, a metal bucket filled with greens in hand. Levi looked up from his plate, watching her move with a grace so natural it almost made him forget to respond. "Guess we're eating like kings today," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Ellie laughed, a crisp, unpretentious sound that filled the room like sunlight. Their connection wasn't loud. It built itself quietly, moment by moment. Levi, the man who once counted words like cattle, now found himself returning to the kitchen more often than not, sometimes with questions about the weather, other times with no reason at all. Each day, Ellie brought more life to the farmhouse. She revived the herb patch behind the kitchen, reorganized the pantry, and coaxed hens into laying again. Her changes came without fanfare, but with a quiet determination that even Levi had to respect. One afternoon, while Ellie was chopping carrots for stew, Levi wandered into the kitchen absent-mindedly. He wasn't watching where he was going and bumped into her just as she turned with a pot of boiling water. The pot splashed partially on the floor, startling them both. "Lord, I'm sorry," Levi exclaimed, reaching for a rag to help. Ellie, now soaked, stared at him for a second, then burst out laughing. Her laughter bounced off the old walls, echoing through the farmhouse. Well, guess I just baptized the kitchen, she joked. Levi laughed too, rubbing the back of his neck. Might owe you a new apron. That shared laugh broke something open between them. From that moment, something shifted. Not all at once, but like spring creeping in after a long winter. Their talks grew deeper. Levi told her about his father, a stern man who taught him how to fence, plow and harvest, but never how to say, "I love you." Ellie shared stories of her childhood in Sweetwater, a small town even dustier than Hazel Ridge, and of her mother who taught her how to kneel in prayer and stand on her own 2 feet. One night, under a canopy of stars, they sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea from chipped mason jars. The air was warm, but the silence between them was charged with something unspoken. "Levi," Ellie said gently, "you ever think about getting married?" The question hit him like a stone tossed in still water. He took a long breath. "Used to. Long time ago. But some things, they just don't grow in dry soil." Ellie didn't reply immediately. She just looked up at the sky, letting his words settle between them. And though neither said it out loud, something had been planted that night, a seed of possibility. Levi found himself looking forward to mornings, not for the chores, not even for the smell of coffee, but for Ellie. She moved through the house like music, quiet, comforting, always there, and Levi, who had once learned to be comfortable in silence, found himself listening for her footsteps, her voice, the clink of pots and pans that meant she was near. That afternoon, Ellie was baking cornbread, the sweet scent pulling Levi into the kitchen like a child, following a trail of sugar. "If you keep cooking like this, I'll be too fat to fit through the barn doors," he teased. Ellie turned, grinning. "You need the strength, farm boy." "Call me Levi," he said, surprising even himself. "No need for all that sir and boss stuff." Ellie tilted her head. "All right, Levi." It sounded different coming from her, lighter, warmer. Later that evening, the farmhouse was unusually still. They both found themselves on the porch again, the stars wide and watchful overhead. "I ain't got much to offer," Levi said after a long pause. "Not the kind of life most women dream about." Ellie looked at him, her face soft in the lantern light. "And who says I'm most women?" He chuckled, rubbing his jaw. "I mean, I don't even know if I can give a woman a family. Tried once. Doctor said it wasn't likely. I guess that stuck." Her voice was quiet but sure. "Family isn't just blood. It's who you stand by, who you cook for, who you cry with." Levi turned to her, surprised. She wasn't just kind. She was brave. Days passed. They danced around something invisible but powerful. He lingered near her when she hummed while folding laundry. She'd bring him tea at sunset when he didn't ask for it. And then one evening he did something unexpected. He cleaned up the old dining room, dusted off the chandelier, wiped down the long-forgotten table, and invited her for supper. "I know it's not much," he said, awkwardly straightening his collar, "but it's the best I've got." When Ellie entered, wearing a blue dress and her hair loosely pinned, Levi swore time stopped. They ate by candlelight, fried chicken, buttered green beans, biscuits with honey. Nothing fancy. But to Levi it was the finest meal he'd ever had. Halfway through dinner, he set his fork down, wiped his hands on his napkin and looked across the table. "Ellie, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know this house, this life. It ain't worth much if I can't share it with you." Her breath caught. "I'm not asking for forever," he added quickly. "Just, would you consider staying? See where this leads?" Ellie looked at him for a long moment, her eyes bright with something he couldn't quite name. Then she smiled. "Levi, sometimes what we're looking for finds us before we even know to ask." They married under a pale blue summer sky, beneath an old oak tree on the McCall property, where wildflowers peeked through the grass and a soft wind whispered through the leaves. There were no violin quartets or towering cakes, just a few neighbors, some borrowed folding chairs, and a preacher who'd known Levi since he was a boy. Ellie wore a simple cream dress, her hair woven into a loose braid with a sprig of baby's breath tucked behind one ear. As she walked toward Levi, barefoot on the grass, every rumor, every whisper in Hazel Ridge faded away. Still, not everyone clapped with sincerity. At the edge of the crowd, a few townsfolk leaned in close, voices low but laced with judgment. "Reckon she's done well for herself," one woman murmured. "Cooked her way into a farmhouse and a husband. Let's see if she can give him what no one else could," another whispered. Levi heard it. He always did. But when Ellie reached him and smiled, steady, sure, he let it go. They said their vows under that oak tree, with nothing between them but truth. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Levi kissed her like a man who had finally come home. The reception was small, hosted right there on the farm. Miss Edna and the neighbors brought pies and fried chicken, and Ellie's peach cobbler was the star of the table. Kids ran barefoot, laughter echoing across the field. Levi stood back, watching it all with a quiet awe, his hand never far from Ellie's. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned amber, Levi and Ellie sat on the porch in two old rocking chairs. He reached for her hand. "Happy?" he asked, the word more prayer than question. Ellie rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Like a seed finally breaking through the soil." That night, the farmhouse didn't feel big and empty. It felt full of stories waiting to happen, full of hope. They didn't talk much before falling asleep in their shared room. But as the cicadas sang outside and Levi lay with Ellie curled beside him, he realized something deep and clear. This was the beginning of everything. It was a warm July morning when Ellie felt the world shift beneath her feet. She'd been rinsing laundry at the basin behind the farmhouse when her hands paused mid-motion. A dizzy wave swept over her. The sky seemed to tilt, and she gripped the edge of the wash basin to steady herself. From across the pasture, Levi spotted her and came running. "You all right?" he asked, concern breaking through his usual calm. "I'm fine," she said with a tight smile. "Just the heat, I think." But Levi wasn't convinced. The next day, he insisted they drive into town. At the Hazel Ridge Clinic, the air was thick with antiseptic and the buzz of old ceiling fans. Dr. Howard, a gentleman in his 60s, examined Ellie with practiced ease. After a few minutes, he straightened and looked at them with a smile that tugged gently at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Levi, looks like you're going to be a father." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Levi blinked once, twice. Then his knees gave out and he sat down hard on the little stool by the window. Dr. Howard chuckled. "I take it this was unexpected." Ellie's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, speechless. When Levi finally found his voice, it came out like a whisper. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I've ever been," the doctor replied. On the drive back home, the truck was quiet but electric. Levi kept glancing at Ellie like she might vanish. Her hand rested lightly on her belly, as if already cradling something precious. Back at the farmhouse, the old porch creaked as they stepped onto it. Levi sat on the top step, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Ellie stood behind him for a moment, then wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "We weren't supposed to have this," he said quietly. "I was told it wasn't possible." Ellie rested her cheek against his hair. "Some things don't follow rules, Levi. Some things just happen when they're meant to." The next few days passed in a haze of wonder and disbelief. The news spread through Hazel Ridge faster than a summer wildfire. People whispered, "Did you hear? She's pregnant." But he couldn't. Wasn't that the talk? Well, looks like either the doctor was wrong, or someone else has been sneaking in the back door. The gossip was sharp and ugly, but Levi ignored it. He had bigger things to focus on, like carving a new crib from oak, painting the old nursery, and reading everything he could find on raising a child. For Ellie, the pregnancy brought both joy and unease. She'd dreamed of this moment but hadn't expected it would come with suspicion, shadowing every step. One evening, as she stood on the porch, watching fireflies rise over the pasture, Levi came and wrapped his arms around her. "They can say what they want," he whispered. "I know the truth, and so do you." She turned in his arms, rested her forehead against his chest and nodded. Together, they stood in the golden dusk, holding tight to something no one else could touch. The months rolled by like the slow turn of a wagon wheel. Autumn came, crisp and gold, painting Hazel Ridge in shades of flame and honey. Inside the farmhouse, life moved to the rhythm of something new. Ellie's belly grew round. Her glow wasn't just a figure of speech. She moved through the house like morning sunlight, warming everything in her path. Levi, once a man of few words, now found himself talking to her belly as if his child could already hear him. He built a cradle from reclaimed pine, sanded it smooth, painted it with trembling hands. Some nights when Ellie slept, he'd stand at the nursery door, watching the moonlight spill over the floorboards, trying to wrap his mind around the impossible. But Hazel Ridge hadn't forgotten its old ways. Whispers still floated from church pews and diner booths. She's glowing all right, but is that really his child? Maybe it's the Lord's will, or maybe it's just good timing. People who once shook Levi's hand now nodded stiffly, looking just past his shoulder. It didn't take much to stir doubt in a town where stories spread faster than wildfire and twice as hot. Levi ignored it, mostly. But one Saturday morning, while buying feed at the mill with Ellie by his side, a man named Curtis Finch, one of those who'd always believed Levi was cursed, looked at Ellie's belly and chuckled under his breath. "Miracles, huh?" he said. "Guess we'll see who that baby really favors." Levi froze. Ellie reached out, gently tugged his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "We know what's true." He said nothing, just paid the bill, loaded the truck, and drove home in silence. But that night, sitting on the porch beneath a quiet sky, he finally spoke. "I don't care what they say," he muttered, "but it kills me that they look at you with that doubt in their eyes." Ellie reached for his hand. "Then don't let them, because I don't." And in that stillness, surrounded by stars and crickets, Levi knew he had to trust something greater than pride. It happened on a stormy night in late March. Rain lashed the windows, wind howled through the trees, and thunder shook the bones of the old farmhouse. Ellie gripped the edge of the bed, face pale, breath sharp and shallow. Levi was pacing, heart hammering louder than the thunder. "I'm getting Dr. Howard," he said, grabbing his coat. "No," Ellie gasped. "We planned for this. Call Miss Jeannie." Miss Jeannie was the local midwife, steady hands, soft voice, and eyes that had seen nearly every birth in Hazel Ridge over the past 30 years. By the time she arrived, soaked to the bone but calm as a lake, Ellie was deep into labor. The farmhouse turned into a hushed world of warm water, whispered prayers, and the measured voice of Miss Jeannie guiding Ellie through wave after wave of pain. Levi stayed just outside the door, forehead pressed against the wall, fists clenched. He'd faced droughts, wild bulls, brush fires, but nothing terrified him more than this moment. Then, at dawn, everything changed. A cry, loud and strong, cut through the hush like a song. Miss Jeannie opened the door, face shining. "You've got a son, Levi, a strong one." Levi stepped into the room slowly, like it might vanish if he moved too fast. Ellie lay back, glowing with exhaustion and joy. And in her arms, a tiny red-faced boy with a head full of dark hair and lungs that demanded to be heard. Levi's knees buckled as he knelt beside them. He tried to speak, but his throat closed. Ellie smiled through tears. "He's real. He's yours." And Levi knew, with a clarity sharper than any blade, that everything he'd ever doubted, every dry season, every harsh word, every empty prayer, had led to this. Hazel Ridge, of course, didn't take the news quietly. Have you seen him? Looks just like Levi did when he was born. Well, maybe it really was a miracle. Miss Jeannie, respected, unshakable, confirmed it for anyone who dared question. There's no doubt. That child carries Levi's blood and heart. And just like that, the tide began to turn. The old doubters still whispered, but others, people who had prayed in silence, people who had lost more than they dared admit, began to speak of faith. of second chances, of barren ground blooming against all odds. At the farm, Levi rocked his son by the fireplace, humming an old tune his father once sang, while Ellie watched from the doorway, hand resting on her belly. Because yes, life had one more surprise on the way. The baby, whom they named Luke, grew strong and joyful, filling the farmhouse with a kind of laughter Levi never thought he'd hear within those walls. Ellie was everything a mother should be, gentle, steady, radiant with purpose. Levi became a man transformed, rising earlier, working harder, returning home with a hunger not just for food, but for moments with his son. Hazel Ridge, though, wasn't entirely done with its whispers. 2 months after Luke's birth, Levi overheard something that made his blood go cold. At the church potluck, as he stepped outside for some air, he caught part of a conversation between Curtis Finch and another man near the water pump. "I'm just saying, McCall's wife sure turned his luck around awful fast. Doesn't add up. You ever seen a miracle happen to someone like him? Who knows? Maybe she brought more than just recipes to that house." Levi stood frozen, the words settling like ash on warm coals. He didn't confront them, he just walked home, heart twisting. That night, as he sat by the crib, watching Luke sleep with one hand curled near his cheek, a fear he thought he'd buried came roaring back. What if he didn't sleep? At dawn, he stood in the kitchen, gripping a coffee mug he hadn't touched, waiting for Ellie. When she came in, hair still damp from the bath, humming softly, he spoke without turning around. "Ellie, I need to ask you something, and I don't want to, but it's eating at me." She stilled. "I know you love me," he said, "and I know Luke's my boy in every way that matters, but I keep hearing things." And Ellie didn't let him finish. Her voice cracked, low but clear. "So you're asking if I lied? If I brought another man's child into your home and called it yours?" Levi turned, ashamed, but nodded once. Ellie stared at him, eyes burning, not with anger, but with heartbreak. "I thought we'd built something stronger than their gossip," she said, "but maybe I was wrong." She walked past him, silent as a storm breaking over dry land. That night, they ate in silence. Luke, sensing the shift, fussed more than usual. Levi tried to speak once, twice, but the words failed him. He spent that night on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars like they might offer forgiveness. The next morning, Miss Edna came to sit beside him. She handed him a letter. "What's this?" "Something you should have read a long time ago. It's from your daddy." Levi opened it with shaking hands. In the faded ink of a man who spoke few words, the letter told the story of a long battle with infertility, one that almost ended the McCall name. But one spring, after years of believing it was impossible, a child came anyway. "Sometimes," the letter read, "we're too stubborn to believe in grace. Don't be like me, son. If God gives you a miracle, hold it with both hands and never ask if you deserve it." Levi wept. Then he ran, past the fields, up the hill, to the garden where Ellie stood watering herbs with quiet precision. He fell to his knees before her, chest heaving. "I was wrong," he said. "So damn wrong. I let their words drown out the truth I've lived every day since you walked into my life." Ellie crouched beside him, her hand on his cheek. "You don't have to say more," she whispered, "but you do have to believe." "I do," he said. "I do now." And in that dirt, beneath the open sky, they forgave everything that needed forgiving. Years passed. Hazel Ridge changed, slowly but surely. The old rumors faded, replaced by stories of something sweeter, of a family who bloomed where no one thought life could take root. Levi and Ellie had 2 more children, Nora and Jessie. The farmhouse, once filled with silence, now overflowed with life. Muddy boots, giggles from behind barn doors, the smell of cinnamon rolls and wood smoke drifting out the windows. People in town stopped calling it a miracle. They started calling it a blessing. Levi became something of a legend, not because of wealth or land, but because of the way he looked at his wife across a crowded room, the way he held his kids like treasure. At the town's annual harvest festival, Luke, now 10, gangly and kind, gave a speech about what made Hazel Ridge special. He spoke of family, of hard work, of believing in things you can't always see. And in the front row, Levi held Ellie's hand, his eyes bright with tears. Later that night, as the kids slept upstairs and the fire crackled in the hearth, Ellie turned to Levi. "You ever think back to the beginning?" He smiled. "Every day." She leaned into him. "Still think you weren't meant for this?" He looked around, the worn wood floors, the framed drawings on the wall, the photographs of 3 children who bore his eyes and her smile. "No," he said. "Now I think I was just waiting for you to arrive." Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently. Inside, the house glowed with something that had nothing to do with firelight, something that no rumor, no doubt, no hardship had been able to dim. Love, rooted deep, unshakable, a harvest born of hope, and finally peace.